G'day guys, hey, here we go. This is my newest painting. Big old green monster from down here at Papamau Beach about 2 weeks ago. I got some good reference photos and that's the painting. Nearly finished it. So recorded the whole thing. Going to show you that in a big time lapse, and I'll explain a bit of how I've done it as I go. But first of all, I'm going to show you the materials that I used to do the painting, and then we'll get into the time lapse. So here we go. Okay guys, here's everything I used. Here's the brushes. So when I first put the sky in, I was using these big old bristle brushes here, like number 10s from Rosemary Co. So I got the paint on with those big old bristle brushes. Then I was using, I used this for about a split second, the Badger brush, which you've seen me use before, but I used that for about 5 seconds in the whole painting. The majority of the brushes, or the majority of the painting was done with these brushes here, these synthetic flat brushes. Now there's nothing flash about these. The only thing that I will say is they're fairly new. They're not really splayed out and they're quite sharp on the ends. So I use these brushes quite a lot. So they're ranging from size 16 down to size 6. I don't even know how sizes work sometimes. Anyway, synthetic filberts, I use them a little bit, tiny bit. Then I use this big old synthetic flat brush that's all splayed out now, and I use that for a bit of dabbing action, stippling now and again. Okay, I don't often use small brushes, but I did use this sable round. I suppose I used the sable round for just a moment there and some of that water splashing. When I was either getting paint on or even scumbling, like putting dry paint, especially in some of that greens, I was doing that with these short bristle flat brushes. With those, right, the paint, there we have Kremnitz white, so that's lead white, titanium white, cadmium yellow pale, cadmium orange. Now this is actually pyrrole rubine, so it's permanent red 254. I used to call it red matter, but it is actually pyrrole rubine, okay. Phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, burnt umber. That's all I use, that's it, just those paints there. And my palette at the end of the journey, I think it was about 5 sessions to paint this painting. There it is, what a blimmin' mess. But there's that paint down there, there's the colours, burnt umber, etc. down there. Now there is the greens. I finished up painting, mixing, oh sorry, the light's bad. Some of the greens from yesterday when I was mixing, and believe it or not, most of the foam in that painting is painted with this sort of mauvey pink colour. The majority of the foam, the light foam, is that mauvey pink colour. And then there's a gradient, because if you ever see me mix, I mix in big gradients. That was my darkest foam, the darky mauve, going down to the lightest, and to be honest, there's a bit of white going on today. But yeah, and you also see me on the video using these little pieces of paper a lot. So this is how I do the colour matching. So let me show you. You basically see this. You see me with this little piece of paper. I take a bit of paint. You can see it tells a story as I'm trying to match my paint colour. So I'm matching it to my reference image. And I put a bit of paint on there and I go up and I match it to the image. Man, you should see that, because I don't know whether you can see it, but anyway, it's pretty accurate. It's a fluke. But yeah, so that's my foam going into that foam. So a lot of time I am actually comparing the colour to the actual reference image, which by the way is a printout on just normal paper, like normal A4 paper or A3 paper. So you can't really do it if you're using an actual photograph printed on photograph paper. That doesn't really work. And obviously you can't do it if you're working from a screen. So that's why I actually like to physically print out my reference photo. And you can see my colours completely changed but kicking off, like, it's kind of good to match your colour and observe the colour in your reference photo, observe the colour in nature, and try and get it onto your painting using the primary palette. That's a whole like game in itself really. But anyway, let's get on and show you how I painted the painting. Righto guys, here we go. As usual, I'm starting to block in the sky first. In the beginning, I usually start with blocking in the sky. As usual, if you've ever seen me painting before, I've got a little bit of masking tape on there just to make life easier. And I'm starting with these grey, sort of mauvey greys. So there is a little bit of mixing, colour mixing coming up, but from my palette, which I've just shown you, the grey, so the burnt umber and the ultramarine blue go together to make my black. You add white to that and you're going to get a grey. Now you could lean that either towards the ultramarine blue or the burnt umber, and in this case lean it towards the ultramarine blue to make it bluey, then add a little bit of red and you've got a mauve, don't you? So it's all pretty, yeah, it's pretty basic stuff really when you're working from that primary palette. How do you make purple, blue and red? It's just which blue, phthalo blue or ultramarine blue. But you know, in this case I can tell you it's normally 9 times out of 10 it's ultramarine blue. Now working my way down, and this is just a block in, I block in the entire painting in the first session and putting the darks where the darks go. So that's a familiar thing that I normally do. I've done it on the last wave too. I went and put the darks in and then came back with the medium tones, and then I sort of hang back and I don't put my lightest lights in till sort of later in the later stages of the paintings. But you're definitely putting the dark tones in and the medium tones. And this when I would be using that reference photo and trying to match my paint to it, the colour of my paint, like I just showed you with those little pieces of paper. So I'm essentially, I'm trying to get the right colour in the right place. But you can't, I don't know, it's hard to get it straight away. Unfortunately, there's a process I have to go through to paint a wave like this, and it takes 4 or 5 layers of paint. But you get a nice finish too with that. You do get a nice depth to your painting. Right, so just working through this. And obviously this is going about 2 or 3 times faster than real time. And I'll let it play at that speed all the way through, because I know some of you people out there said, yeah, you're using it as a reference, so it's better if it's a little bit slower. And one thing it's better if I play the whole thing. That always drove me nuts when people jump ahead an hour. That always drove me nuts if I was watching time lapses and you miss a whole lot. You're like, oh, that was the secrets. He just missed out all the secrets. But yeah, no, I'll give you all the secrets. I'll play the whole thing. I probably won't talk through the whole thing. Jeebus. So that's actually the start of the foam colour I just put in there. Strange little colour. And in front of that foam, that dark's going to have floating foam go over top of it. So when I said foam colour, that was actually the breaking wave, and that dark's going to have that bit of floating foam. I don't really know what you'd call it, coming over top of that. But what I'm saying is I'm setting up for the subsequent layer. That's what I'm doing here, is I'm setting up for the next layer. Now, starting on that big green monster in the front. So it probably wasn't as big as, it looked big in the painting, but really in actual life, it probably wasn't as big as it looks in the painting. But that's all right. So, and the colours in the painting, they did end up a little bit different, because I've done some glazing, some scumbling, and the colours, a bit different to the actual photo reference, but that's all right. I was also down on the beach, and you got a memory of the colour as well, and the photo doesn't always pick the colours up 100%. Now, erring on the side of going a bit darker when I can. I think in this painting you'll actually notice I come back later and I do make that darker again. So you can always do that, you don't have to get it first go. And there are some things here, yeah. I left some things in here that I've done wrong, specifically so you can see how forgiving oil paint is, like when I'm wiping it off there. So, and I think you see me wipe more off actually coming up. So if you're beginning, or even like me, you've been doing it for years and you still get it wrong, you can, if you're trying to put dark paint on and you don't get it dark enough, okay, so if you want to make it darker, you could put some more dark on, but bearing in mind the paint that you've got on there, you're dealing with oil paint, is still going to be wet. So any paint that you put on now will mix with the paint that's already on your canvas. So if you're trying to make it darker, it'll mix, it'll only go like a little bit darker. Do you understand that? If you've got dark grey, it'll mix with the grey that's on there and it'll only go a little bit darker. So the way, how do you make it darker than it actually is? You just wipe that paint off and start again. And that's definitely not the end of the world, because you see me trying to do this here, trying to get a bit darker. That was quite a mouth, yeah, here we go. Now it just wasn't right. So just wipe that off. Just take that paint off and then get like a t-shirt material. Not your best t-shirt. And you just take that paint off and then start again. So that's why that's why you should be using oil paint, because it's so forgiving if you're learning. Then just come back and have another go at trying to get the right colour in the right place. So subsequently, on the flip side, if you're trying to make it light and you need to make it lighter, so you've got a light grey and you want to make it even lighter, the white that you put on is just going to mix with the grey that's on there. It's only going to go a little bit lighter. So if you want to make a dramatic change in tone, just wipe your paint off and start again. That's probably what I'm saying. There we go. This is actually winding up the first day, or the block-in. Now I'm going by and trying to make some alterations to the darks and lights, but really I'm wasting my time there because of what I just told you. So I best to wait for the next day. So don't get caught up on the first day trying to, get it perfect, because it's going to be so much easier to come back on the subsequent layer once this first layer is dry. Right. Okay, here's that bit of mixing that I promised you. Now this is not specifically filmed for you guys, so sorry, it's a little bit, the light's not good. Now, making that grey, burnt umber and ultramarine blue to make the grey. And there, right there, that was phthalo blue and cadmium yellow pale. That was to make phthalo blue and cadmium yellow pale. That goes together and makes a bit of that viridian colour. So I was adding some viridian colour to that grey to lean it a little bit viridian. Now the good thing about this is I get it completely wrong, which I think you learn more when I get it wrong sometimes. Now I get that little piece of paper and I compare it against my reference photo, which I got right there. And it was so wrong because it was the reference photo lent more purpley mauve in the background. So I'm matching, this is the next day, so I'm matching up to get the paint at the same colour that I used the day before. So now adding a little bit of red to it to start to lean that towards mauve. So I think this teaches you that, it's just a grey. And then we're just tinting a grey. Now you can start to see it going the mauvey colour. Now what is actually important is to get the tone right, i.e. how dark or light something is. And it's actually quite hard to get the tone right, but if you aim for the colour, in my experience with the people that come to my class, if you aim to get the right colour, you almost always get the right tone just by accident really. The subsequent result is you end up getting the right tone, even if you don't quite get the right color. And the tone is the most important thing. So now I'm making that gradient. See, I finally got the right color. Then I made a bit of a darker through to lighter gradient there on the left. And now, a bit of gray again, ultramarine blue, burnt umber. There was some white going there. And now, probably, I think I put a bit of red in there anyway. This is that lighty pinky mauve color I made for the foam. And with a little bit more red. So just be subtle with your mixing. Don't like mix up a whole bucket load of paint. And if you do start mixing up a bucket load of paint, just pull a bit off to the side. Oh, excuse my head there too, by the way. Like I say, this was just something I added in. Yeah. So there's all those colours there. So you can see the mauvey in the background there and heading up to that more viridian in the front. So remember, from my palette, I make the viridian sort of colour with phthalo blue and a little, it's like phthalo blue and a pinch of cadmium yellow pale. Now I can just work on darks and lights. And when you're painting water, what I'm doing there all the time is the brush is generally going in the direction that the water's going. I'm working with the water direction with my brush stroke. And I know it's sped up a little bit there, it's hard to see, but that's what's going on. Because within those waves, with any wave, there's all those, well, little waves. I think I described it in my last video. And you've got to depicting all these little waves. You can do that with brush strokes. There's that little piece of paper. Lift that in a couple of times so you can actually see that I do that, and that's not something that I just do with the students that come to my class. Or else you can just, paint directly onto your reference photo. But that gets a bit messy after a while, and you don't have that little journey with your piece of paper, which is good when you're starting out. Because when you're mixing, if you get it wrong, you can look back and you go, oh, I was closer back at the start, which will give you some sort of, I don't know, reinforcement that you were doing it right at one stage. It's only practice. Right, so you can see that brush stroke going up the wave. And reinstating darks and lights. Look, there's a lot of this darks and lights, but like I say, I'll let it play. And then I'll catch you up with some more chat once we get a bit further on. Right, so back already, because this is where it starts to get interesting. This is me working back into that foam. So this is the floating foam. Like, I need better descriptive words, floating foam. But anyway, I think you'll understand as I paint it what I mean. And this is where I laid in that dark on the blocking layer on the first day, and now that layer is dry, so I'm coming back. And when I put this foam in, it's quite a gestural movement. So it's not deliberately painted. I'm not deliberately copying the photo. I'm just creating some shapes that are really moving with the water, because that foam really does just drift back with the wave, with the current. And it's really just moving my whole arm, that synthetic flat brush, not a lot of paint on the brush, hardly any paint at all, and just bringing a gestural sort of movement. It happens quite incidentally. Now I've seen other people approach this, where they paint this sort of thing and they paint it very illustrated and quite deliberately. They must be using a reference photo or just know how it works, and that works for them. That doesn't work for me. So for me, it's just this very gestural sort of movement. And yeah, I don't know what works. This is actually quite tricky to get, I'll be honest. I think that's a little bit tricky, that floating foam, but it does give your water great movement once you can get it sorted. But anyway, there's lots of that foam in this painting, so we'll cover that heaps. Now just working in the darks and lights back into this front wave, and that's scrubbing it with that's that short flat bristle brush. So remember I'm working on board, so board I can scrub it in more than I can on if it was a stretched canvas or stretched linen. And there's not a lot of tooth to my board. There's a little bit of tooth. When I say the tooth, I mean the weave. So there's obviously no weave on a board. So I can put that thin layer of paint, and when I say a thin layer of paint, that layer I'm putting on there, if there wasn't paint beneath it, if I was just putting that on just canvas, I would definitely not be covering the canvas at all. So I'm just building up on the previous layer. And I do that, 4 or 5 times in this painting. Now, more of that foam. The important thing is to depict the movement of the water. And then, if you're going to do it my way, don't think about it too much. But if you're going to actually try and copy your photo, you can do that too. That colour that's going on there is, obviously I've laid in the dark, that's going to be the water beneath the foam, that darky browny grey that's there. And now I'm coming through with some of the darker mauves. And I'll just lay in, because there's a lot of foam in the front of this wave, so I'll just lay in some basic shapes in the beginning, and then I'll work on that. Another little interesting technique coming up soon, I think. Yeah, right now. That's me removing paint. That's another good technique you want to have up your sleeve, is taking paint off. So because the first layer was dry, that first layer is going to stay there. And I can take that paint that I've just put on, take a bit of that paint that I just put on off. So how do I do that? I get a very clean brush, like a clean brush through my solvent, clean my brush on my solvent, and then I load my brush with a little bit of liquid, or hardly any really, and I just lift that paint off. But then you need to wash your brush again every time. Then just go back in, do the same process and lift that paint off. And a bit of actually breaking wave there, out to the left. In my reference photo, that was quite a big wave breaking there on the left, but it was right up front, and I think it was distracting to the composition of the whole image, of the whole painting. So I just made that a lot smaller than it actually was, that painting, that breaking wave on the left up front. Now we're still on the second pass. No, third pass right now. This is the third day now. And somebody said to me, and I discussed this on my previous video actually, because what I normally do is I normally lay in my darkest darks. And this is handy in a seascape, but it's very, very handy in a landscape with a lot of depth to it. So you lay in your darkest darks, and when you're painting a landscape, or anything in general, as things get further away, they become lighter. So if you put your darkest, generally your darkest dark is going to be somewhere up in the foreground of your painting. If you put that darkest dark in like I did there, that means any dark that's going in as we go further back is going to be lighter than what's in front. So that's a good way of controlling your tone. What I've also done there was I tried to put some of my lightest lights in, because someone had said that. Someone had said they saw someone in my class said they saw someone put their lightest lights in. I thought, oh, that's a good idea too. So you're always learning, so I thought I'd give that a go. So put some lightest lights in, so then I get my complete tonal range. Anyway, I don't know whether the lightest lights really work for me. But I'll try it again. I'll try that whole thing again. So there we go. Now I'm just going to be building on what's there. Starting to create some of this breaking wave. And some of the sky reflecting on the water. So you've got sky reflecting on the water there. That's the light greys. So I'll let this play. Okay, now up into this front wave again. Now here I'm starting to put the darks in. And I think, well, the resulting painting looks quite translucent. So that's just a trick really. Because how do you make the light seem like it's coming through that wave? It's by putting dark next to light. That's how you make something seem lighter than it actually is. You put some dark beside it. So luckily in these waves, the ripples of the wave must create little shadows that are a little bit darker, I suppose. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I know there's some dark in there and there's also some light in there. And luckily its light is beside the dark, so it makes it appear lighter than it actually is. So that's me starting to do that now. There we go on with that. Now you see me starting to work all over the painting because this is the actual video of the painting. All I've done is I've taken out all the little bits where I go and load my brush and all that stuff in between. So just to make it just flow a bit easier. I do that just for you guys. Just take out all those little bits. Only takes forever. But anyway, now I'm starting to work on that little splash. Remember, if you're enjoying the video, remember I went through and I took all those little bits out to make it easier to watch for you guys. So for crying out loud, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and you are enjoying this. And we're going to come back and I'm going to do part 2. Part 2 will be the second part of this wave, and part 2 is where all the details start to come in, but you have to have this first part. This first part is essential. Now, starting to work on those little splashes. And that's where I've got that filbert, that synthetic filbert. Well, it's a bit more of a pointy end on the filbert, and having a go now with that sable round or rigger. And just going in with the medium tone there, not the lightest lights, just the medium tones on that little breaking wave. So yeah, using the medium tone initially to put that little splash in, and then come back and you'll find some darks in there. If you were to zoom in and look at the photo, once again, a really good reference photo is sort of key. Making it up is quite hard to do until you've done a fair bit of it, I think. Until you've painted quite a lot of anything, or you've observed a lot of something, it's quite hard just to make it up out of your, well, just imagination. It's easier to get a really good reference or work from life. But, you know, like I said, I do a lot of plein air painting. I love the plein air painting and it's really good for landscape, but for seascape like this, yeah, it's quite tricky. I think you need a photo, really. Trying to paint this standing on the beach you got to be quick. Oh, jeepers. Anyway, working back into that more floating foam coming up this wave, and it's creating the movement of that wave. Right, so if you guys are out there, some people did ask for the reference photo last time, and I know they're having a go at painting the wave I'd done in the previous video, so if you are doing that, email me and let me know how it's going. I'd love to hear if anyone's having a go. And if you've got any questions, just ask me a question in the comments. If you got any advice. Anyway, this is me. So I work over the whole painting, and I don't stay in any one area for too long. And that's how I develop that's how I sort of weigh up my tone. I go lighter gradually across the whole painting. I don't hang in one area for too long. Just building up those lights and the darks, but across the whole painting. I don't know why, that's just how I work. I know I see other people that they basically work from one corner and they work their way across the whole painting, but that doesn't really work for me. So I just move everywhere. which is probably quite weird to watch. Look at me, up, down, all over the show. Okay, so nearly going to wind this one up. Going to run this one in 2 parts as well, because it's jeepers, it's nearly gone 40 minutes, which is long enough for one video. But yeah, the good news is that there's only 2 parts. So this is the 3rd pass. I do 5 passes on this painting. And when we come back, it will be all those really finer details. And hopefully start to make it look far more realistic than it is now. But yeah, good news, it's only 2 videos apart. But that's it, that's the final wave. That's what it will look like in the end. Thanks for watching, guys.